your side.
All right, here we go.
Questions? Are you ready after we had?
Yes, sir.
I know, after we had sugar.
You're ready. Now we get to the point in the day where we'll talk about some potential scenarios. And again, not asking you to decide, asking you to discuss. And we talk about potential prioritization as well. We'll go back and we'll start with facility space, go through allotments, funding, and staffing. So, Mr. Desiremore.
Thank you, sir. I'm a little bit concerned because it's after lunch and everybody's talking about pulling the plug. I want to just recap real quickly a couple of things. The options here again, new school construction is the option that's way out there in the future to take care of providing these additional classrooms. The 12-month option there where we're talking about mobiles, we're very limited now. About the only place you have left are some of the newer schools that may have some room on them. Capping and capping, those two items are still, I think, would be considered short-term fixes or interim fixes. Redistricting is always out there, and every year you'll have the opportunity to do that. And the new construction and the plans, we are all looking at those items and keeping in mind the new class size requirements when we do that. So what I'm going to talk to you about more is about this first item, the immediate stuff, in which you may need to be going out there. We want to paint a picture for you what that impact means potentially for schools based on the numbers we're looking at. So with that, I'll go there but first. Something to liven the crowd up here.
That'll liven us up.
Welcome.
I just sneak that one in.
And yet I'm here.
Yeah, she's here.
I'm figuring out how to get back up there Saturday.
I'm good. I know.
The old sales meeting trick was to put a pin up in the middle. I think that's a much better solution.
I don't think you get to do that anymore.
Well, I was kind of, I had Laura Evans in my mind there for a little bit. I didn't have a cow or anything. Or baby cow.
But you had to picture Kathy's grandkid.
That didn't go over right there. Let's move on. Okay. Got to get control back here. So let's talk about painting a picture of the impact. And what you see here, this first slide, is a picture of number of schools, okay? All these numbers represent the numbers of schools. And a reminder again, the data being used is the enrollment projections for next year, okay? Enrollment projections for next year, and this is if you implemented the entire class size fix in next year also, okay? This is to cover the entire 438 classrooms I mentioned earlier. If you remember previously, I said there were 15 schools that wouldn't need to convert. As you see on the far right, there's 98 schools that need to do something. So we've listed the other classrooms that are in a school, okay? And I want to point out immediately to start off with, you see also to the far right, pre-K and adaptive self-contained will not be considered in this discussion on any of the options presented to you today, okay? So what we did here is we took a look at the classrooms that are available and kind of gave classrooms different priorities when we looked at them as using them to take care of the additional classrooms. In other words, you convert them. The very first one, the first two columns are vacant or used for storage. That's kind of an obvious. If they're those are trailers usually, maybe some classrooms. If they're vacant now or you're being used for storage, they're obviously the first choice to use to be converted over to use for classrooms. There's a category called Other. That is classrooms that our principals, when they did the survey, did not fit in any of the categories that we identify in our capacity model, but they are using it for something else. And it's something they're probably doing in order to get things done that they need to be done at that school, or a certain approach that they're leading towards. Who knows? They could be using it for teachers. Okay.
I think one example that I can give you is a lot of schools have moved to like a science specialist as opposed to science being a part of the core curriculum the regular classroom does. And so they take a regular classroom and make it a science classroom, and kids going in and out of it.
We actually have science up there. Okay. We already have science up there too. Because we knew that was a little bit more prevalent one also.
A faculty room?
It could be some kind of, I can remember one of our, when we used to go to schools for meetings, I remember one of the rooms being like the dashboard room or a lot of information. So anyway, frankly, we took those two categories and put them at the front, okay? And then if you look at the first line, that is basically converting the vacant and other, and then we use double ups to take care of the rest of the requirement, okay? That can actually be accomplished. That would take care, that right there would take care of all 438 classrooms. The double ups.
I'm not following.
No, that's schools. That's number of schools. That's number of schools. Okay. 98 schools could use vacant classrooms. 50 schools could use vacant or storage. 34 schools have other classrooms available. And then 65 schools still would have a need to convert classrooms after those first two columns, enough that 65 schools would use double up to accomplish that. The next slide, I will show you number of classrooms. Okay?
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
This is number of schools.
So 98 of 106 elementary schools.
Of 113.
113.
All right, we'll need to convert something. And when you look at this, after you do the first two columns, 65 of them would have to use double up, and they could take care of the rest of the requirement. Now, the next item we put up here was to convert all of the non-regular classrooms. It didn't matter, okay? But we made double up last. So if you go through that, you can see how many schools would have to use up all their classrooms in each one of those categories to meet the need, and you'd still have 7 schools that would have to double up some classrooms.
I will say the language matters. Meet the need of the reduced class size.
Correct.
Are we compromising the academic program to meet the need of reduced class size?
That's the
So
question.
the need is the word of concern.
Yes, this is only the space consideration, irregardless of the impact on instruction.
Okay, all right. So we're meeting a physical requirement without regard to the impact on the instructional program.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
The very next one, what you will find is that we would convert all but the art and the music and the magnet, and then double up in order to take care of the requirement. And then what we did for the last one was similar to the third one, except we laid in a criteria where you would not use up all the classrooms in any of the categories after other, okay? Which therefore results in more double ups at the end, okay? Again, these are number of schools.
Does double up mean that if we're going to have 20, it's 40 in the same space?
Not necessarily.
No, that's not what that means.
What is
Okay.
likely to happen is if the limit is 20, you're not likely to have 40. You might have 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've exceeded, you have to address it. It would be really unlikely that you'd have 30, in my opinion, if the limit is 20. It could happen. But you make the change because you dropped in more kids during the year,
Okay.
potentially, or you started the year and you would equalize and double up to make it work.
Okay.
So that's interesting too. We've had that conversation a lot. And Joe has also spent time considering which classrooms could be used to double up, reminding ourselves that not that long ago we had classrooms designed for more than 20. 25, 26, 27, 28. So most of the classrooms can accept that number of students.
Okay.
So double up could be 25 kids with 2 teachers?
Double up is the number of teachers.
Right. Okay.
Correct.
And then I can, if I'm looking at this, looking at our ESL, LEP, AIG intervention space, our resource space, I can make the assumption that if I wanted to protect those spaces like magnet, music, and art, I could just take those numbers and put them into the double up column.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay?
I can do that myself.
And the double ups are assumed to be at the same grade level?
This is not multi-age.
Not multi-age. It would be 2 third grade teachers.
But that's not how we presented it.
Right. Okay. All right. That's not the intention.
I think their preference is double up by same grade level versus multi-age classroom. And
Okay.
the new curriculum that we put out presents some challenges as well to do that. So.
Ms. Mahaffey, the bottom 2 items there, those are examples of what you just said, in which we reduced the number of the other rooms and just increased the double-ups to counter that out. We made magnet, music, and art untouchable in those last 2.
And the first option, right?
And the first option.
First option is maximum. Right.
Well, the first option, we made double up the first priority, which was able to take care of it. So that's, again, number of schools. Let's take a look at number of seats. You ready? Okay.
Is it fair to say that double up could have some pedagogical value? Not saying it does, but could. None of the other options do. Is that a fair statement? That's my perception, but I'm just trying to bounce that idea off the wall.
From a resource point of view, yes.
I'm talking pedagogy.
Facility, yeah. So yes, we could.
Pedagogy, if I get rid of collaborative spaces, if I get rid of science, art, that is 100% pedagogical bad. Double up, if I can put 2 teachers with 25 kids, particularly since we don't have a teaching assistant in every class anymore, there could be, I'm not saying is, there are settings where that could have some pedagogical value.
And to the first part of your statement, 100% bad in the absence of an alternative that was adequate, whatever that might be.
There is no adequate art without a real art space.
Put that on the table.
And I'm putting what I'm saying on the table, too.
You can do some juggling.
Yeah.
You could do some juggling in the building. So I wouldn't go to 100%. I would say a high probability.
99.95.
We'll argue
Okay,
5 points.
Does it float?
Exactly.
Want me to put mine on the table too?
Yeah, were we all putting
Yes, that's the point.
Oh, you did put it on the I don't have it. I'm better.
Okay. Not yet.
Ready? All right. So let's take the same concept and let's now look at classrooms. Okay? Looking for 438. So what you see here is the first 2 columns are pretty much consistent down through the list. And that's where you would make up a lot of those classrooms. And then the first one, doubling up is the priority. It would be 250 classrooms. Now, I want to take time to point out one other thing here. As we said, there are a lot of rooms in a school that could be used for double up. We ran a percentage with these numbers here, the 250. There is only one school out of the 113 in which the number of classrooms that would be used for doubling up would exceed more than 30% of the classrooms in the school. And you have your number of classrooms in the school. There's only one school that you would exceed 30% of those classrooms being doubled up in order to give you the 250. The reason I say that is the inefficiency of having it being 23, 24, 25 to solve your problem. I would get more and more concerned the closer you get to using up all the classrooms in the school as double up classrooms. You wouldn't want to double up every classroom in the school. That just wouldn't work.
Could you even from a fire marshal standpoint?
This is considering that too. Okay? I just wanted to point out that this number didn't use up a whole lot of classrooms in the school. It used up at most 30-some% of the classrooms that are available.
Which is a third. I would be actually intrigued with the number, maybe 10%, 20%, greater 30%. 10% I could see viable. 30% seems really high to me.
How do we pick that number, though? How do you pick what
Yes,
percent?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying
That's where I'm interested in the gradation.
And it would vary region to region, I would imagine.
I would imagine.
You'd see more of it
In a crowded area.
And you're looking at bottom line numbers, again, for the entire district. Again, the second one is, the only criteria was that double up was the last thing to be used. The next two, protect magnet, music, and art. The last one, make sure that you don't use up every classroom underneath computer lab, collaborative, science, general, and resources. There's at least some classrooms preserved.
That's total classrooms that are impacted, right? Or is that just one, are we just looking at one school?
No, this is the entire district. This is your 438 classrooms.
I was going to say, I imagine there's only one computer lab per school.
Right.
And just to recall, this is mobile and permanent classrooms that we have.
This is counting everything on the campus. If they had mobiles on, if they had trailers on their campus and were not using them, they were listed under the vacant.
I'm struggling, I have to admit. So if we look at the 99 general ed classrooms that would be converted to regular instruction, that's 99 classrooms spread over 53 schools. And the assumption being that they are today being used for a purpose of general ed. Okay.
So where does that work take place?
Yeah, right there, 53, 52, 50, depending on the criteria.
Right. Well, where are those services then provided? Where is ESL instruction done or the AIG instruction if the classroom is taken for standard teacher and students?
Assuming that they already have a space, because there are schools where
53
there isn't a
schools
space
did.
for AIG.
they're looking at the ones that do.
Well, we can sort of argue that AIG can be pushed in. I say sort of because I don't believe we can completely do that. I don't see how you can push in all of your ESL and LAP. That just is a physical impossibility.
So I think what ends up happening then is that smaller non-standard spaces like conference rooms or work rooms or those kinds of things become spaces where you pull smaller groups of students that wouldn't serve well as an additional classroom, but that you could pull small groups into. So I think it'd be a combination of places where push-in makes sense and where it didn't, you'd still have to do some pull-out small groups, and it would occur in other non-standard spaces that you wouldn't want to use for regular classroom instruction.
So somewhere where you can fit a teacher desk, one of the rainbow desks, and
Possibly.
is that what you called it?
Not great.
And having done a lot of some of the audits in the schools, every school is somewhat different. But when you're in that school, you can right away tell which can be a classroom space where there could be 2 teachers and 20 or 30 students, or where there could have been, sometimes there's just a little too small. But it would be perfect for an AIG small group of 12 or a small ESL group. And there are, in a lot of the media centers, there are sometimes rules off those media centers that sometimes have been used also. So there's some schools that have a lot of smaller spaces, so it's not a problem. There are also some schools that have almost all large classroom spaces and hardly any small. So in all of the schools, they have a media center where groups of students can meet also in small batches. Does that help?
So kind of like when we were at Fuller and they had like 4 different things going on in their media center.
But then the media center is not used for its intended purpose.
Well,
They're scheduling issues.
Everybody schedules now to go in and out of the media center. So it's supposed to accommodate small groups of students and all of that kind of thing. So it's transitioning over. That's always an underutilized, sometimes underutilized space. But as far as the large classroom spaces, sometimes you didn't need a large classroom space for 5 students or 12 students.
Well, you looked at each school individually yourself.
Each school is individual.
So that's the way we kept it.
Mr. Fletcher, there's an impact on instruction.
I'm just concerned about losing the instructional model over time.
Well, I think it's important to realize that this is mapping out assuming we build no new capacity. We obviously cannot flip a switch and have new capacity tomorrow. But this is really laying the foundation
This
to
is
say,
flipping that switch.
well, yeah, no, right. But this is which we can't do, right? This is saying we can't flip a switch tomorrow and get more space, therefore force here.
Right.
But we need to look at this and say, okay, so what does this mean in terms of what we have to build on top of our growth and renovation plan? And I'm sure that's where we're going.
It is, and also to test your tolerance for some of those scenarios.
Yes.
This is a theoretical construct. You're sharing your thoughts about the impact on instruction. That's important. But as you think about those potential scenarios, what you're saying is exactly what we need to hear. I mean, it is that theoretical construct, and it's just that, because it's not going to happen exactly that way. But this is for you to tell us what your thoughts are about that, and you're doing that.
Would it be possible to get just a brief description of what are we considering collaborative space in a school that was built 20 years ago? I mean, what does collaborative mean? Science, I mean, we actually built science labs in elementary school at one point in time. I think most of them have been completely converted. I mean, what do those labels mean today relative to the schools where those spaces occur?
Pam, you might have more, but I would venture to say to you right now that if you took computer lab, collaborative, and science and put those together, those were all computer lab classrooms at one time. And now they've ventured away from computer lab classrooms and started using them for collaborative and science.
And one of the part of what you might have heard previously is makerspace rooms, that they were converting labs into being makerspace rooms. That was part of the model a couple of years ago. But you see that there's not a lot of them. Where the schools have had an opportunity to take a regular classroom or a lab, and most of the times they were computer labs, and have it be, instead of a place where there were 24 desktop labs, think of where groups of students could collaborate around using laptops or other materials to be able to do research, to be able to do all sorts of different work. And so some of the schools have used these collaborative rooms for staff as well as for students to be able to meet.
So
it is instructional. It is very much a model in instructional.
So what's up there is doing away with the use of those spaces.
So in our
Which
newer
is I'm
schools,
not excited about at the moment.
No. In our newer schools, we have flexible seating
Right.
built in.
Collaborative space is built.
And it becomes a collaborative space. In our older schools where they don't have, unless the PTA has refreshed everybody's furniture, they will have one room with the flexible seating furniture. Maybe a wall is painted green for a green screen.
Yes.
And so they will push into that if they're doing some project-based learning or they need a separate space for to kind of put the students in a different mindset for learning. So it works really well, and it's a good space for them to have because they don't have the resources that we see at our newer schools in the classroom with furniture and
That,
seating.
though, says they will go away.
But that's the reality of
No,
right.
but that to me is an unacceptable compromise to the instructional program that's available to our students
Well,
in those schools.
Right. The whole
So that
thing
just-
is Sophie's choice, right? Like nobody likes any of these ideas.
Well, I'm not sure computer labs. I don't have a strong opinion about the use of a computer lab in an elementary school, given the classroom use of the technology today and how it might be redeployed. I'm more concerned about some of these other specialized spaces.
I hear that.
What yet are other districts doing, or are we kind of leading the charge on this, so to speak?
To my knowledge, there's not a lot that is out there as to the response. The districts that are not growing don't really have this issue.
Right.
It's the districts that are growing and growing greatly every year that have the issue. That's one thing. And the other thing is Wake County has been such a progressive leader in so many areas, facilities being one of them. Allotments, you've heard that, even with the staffing and recruitment. I mean, there are a lot of things that Wake County does that make Wake County the great place that it is for kids that are impacted by this, that I'll pick on it because I was there, that really have no meaning in Bertie because they have such little local funding and they have space because they have declining enrollment. So again, it's very different. I have not come across a plan yet that made me think, oh, this is something we really need to think about in the model. I'd like to think that Charlotte Mac, Union, Gaston, those that are growing, Pender, growing greatly, they're doing something, but I haven't seen evidence of it.
But some of them still have additional space. I mean,
perhaps.
Union is the only one I know of that's still building like that.
Pender is about to explode. Believe it
They
or not.
built one school.
They're building one elementary and one middle school for next year, and they are really in a bad place because the growth in Pender is incredibly high. And who would have thought that? But that's the case. It's a good question.
So-
Don't know anything.
So are we looking to just help brainstorm ideas? Are we looking for board direction? Or, because I would also like to assume that the principals know their schools and their faculty and what's going to work with them for their spaces.
Both. What is helpful is the discussion that you're having. When Mr. Fletcher says, that bothers me because if we take that away, we're going to lose that. When Dr. Martin says, there's impact if you take that away on instruction, on pedagogy. Yep, that's exactly what we need to hear to get a sense of your tolerance. Not to go back, but you'll recall also there's a cost here. Remember the chart with the conversion costs? Mm-hmm. And so some things cost a lot more than other things. And we talked about that some. I don't need to go back and bring that in, but that's part of the equation too. Now, from the board's point of view, hearing your thoughts about what's acceptable, what's tolerable, what you're going to pound the table and say, do not bring that. As an individual member, again, no decision by the board today, will help us figure out what land on the table as a recommendation for you to have to act on at some point. Because what I don't want to do is to take a group of people who are really knowledgeable, expert, experienced, that's inclusive, and come up with a recommendation, and the board goes, why'd you bring this out? And you may still do that, but we want to avoid as much of that as possible.
as a former specialist, I know the advantage of instruction when I had my own classroom versus when I was on a cart. And I would like to see that protected, because I would hate to be the general ed teacher who has the music push in during recorder season.
There's no planning for that, teacher.
No.
It's hard to start.
The other thing to be sensitive to is, I think converting, as you said, Mr. Fletcher, the computer labs. Pretty much our level of instruction is in the classroom because we have the devices there. But in our schools, the way they're designed, that computer lab doesn't have a bathroom in it. It's typically on the first floor. So yes, I can take that away and I can make it into a kindergarten or first grade classroom, but then I've got to figure out where is the nearest bathroom. And sometimes that's across the hall. It might even be in your maintenance closet is the closest one. So you don't have that there. And this collaborative piece, we have talked about relationships, and it's not just the child, it's also the adults in that building. So if I'm the only kindergarten teacher and I'm a first-year teacher, even worse, okay, I'm now over here in isolation and not with my other teammates, where simple things of observation, being able to, observe what's going on, get help from them. That's a challenge, even though when we do convert them. And the other thing is you can do some better jobs with your possibly using one classroom with my experience, 3 is about the maximum number of teachers that you can put in one classroom, meaning I've got CCR, ESL. So I've taken that one classroom and divided it into 3 spaces, okay, for instruction. But I can give that classroom up and change it into a classroom for children, and then I have to reassign those 3 teachers. Well, I can't put 2 CCR teachers in the middle of the book room. Like, book rooms are usually good places because the books are all there, and there's a little tiny space. It's great for small groups. Storage closets. I've used storage closets for, and literally it's a little tiny table. You can't get usually more than 2 children in there, sometimes 3. A big kidney table won't fit. So I think it's also, if I've got CCR, I want them collaborating together because they're teaching multiple grades. They're not, and so they cross over sometimes. So I don't want, and I don't necessarily want my children that need services, because we do pull in and push out. So push out's not, push in is not the problem. But we do have kids that need to travel. So how far are we having to travel to get the service? So to Mr. Fletcher's point is keeping our instructional program as high as we can is really important.
Well, I just wanted to reinforce that point, because I think pedagogy really has to be what drives all of this. I'm in complete agreement. Computer labs anymore are probably not that important, but almost all the other absolutely are. And I'm going to come back to the doubling up can have pedagogical value. In the Read Across America Day, I read to a doubled up class. And it was actually very interesting watching both the students and the teachers' interaction. And I didn't directly ask them, but I sure got the sense that they were arguing a positive to that in that setting. It's not going to work in all settings, but the double up scares me less than almost all the other options. And so I would love to see an evaluation of that. I've also heard from some parents some real challenge of doubling up across a grade level. That usually is seen as a positive for the lower grade and you see more as a negative for the upper group. Huh? Like a
Doubling
1-2
up or combination class?
Kathy was
combo. What's the difference between a combo and a double up? I mean, it's,
Well, we defined that earlier. Double up is the same grade with 2 teachers.
but they're all sitting in the same category of double up.
They're double ups.
I don't know that they are.
No, they're only same grade double ups,
right?
No, there's no combinations.
No, there's no combinations, only double.
Where would combinations fit in this category?
We did.
Combinations are if you need 3.5 teachers here, 4.5 teachers here. That is the 7. That's 8 classrooms you need. So
Right.
the double up just provides the 8th classroom.
No, I understand that. If one would do a combo class, oh, you're saying if you have one teacher with 2 grades.
Yes.
It's when you don't have quite
Yes.
enough
No.
kids to
But
fill.
there have also been doubling up.
Cross grades, but-
Cross grades. Anyway,
But this we did.
my point is the double up can be valuable and can be detrimental. But I think that is probably the area where we have the most possibility to do work and have the least impact and even potential beneficial impact on pedagogy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Pam.
Can I just say one thing about the doubling up too? It depends.
Yes.
It depends. Because if you're going to try to double up with 32 first graders, and you have 2 teachers, that is ideal. That's a wonderful thing if you have a big enough group. So the doubling up is not a one-size-fits-all for all schools, because there are some schools that just don't have those huge classes. Some of the 3rd grade classrooms where 3rd graders are smaller, and historically in most of the schools, those 3rd grade classes are smaller than the kindergarten and 1st grade classes.
Right.
And the 5th grade
Right.
classes are
Even
sometimes
smaller.
the smallest. So when you're looking at doubling up, it is a great solution when you have that root. And it depends on whether you're talking about 28 students or 36 students. So I just want to caution that it's not like an either or.
Okay.
Well, so are we supposed to say instructionally this is what we wouldn't want to give up, irregardless of us then not thinking about what can we do about that? Sure. Okay, so we're not worried about the solution. We're just worried about, I mean, we are worried, but when we're thinking in this realm of what we do not want to give up, we're not going to be thinking about, well, we have to because...
Imagine if a recommendation is presented and there's something in there that you know is going to trouble you. Say it. That's what it is. Let us, again, tell us now. Don't let us make the recommendation. We still may do that. We'll try to get it all together. But this is the opportunity for you to tell us what you're thinking so that we can hopefully respond to that better than just taking it out of our heads and saying, okay, let's see what the board says now.
They don't want us to surprise them. They want to know what our policy is.
And vice versa.
Right.
Hey, put it out there now. Don't come back later on.
Yeah, don't come back. I just, it's hard for me to do this, and then you would come back with a recommendation that we need to build 12 new schools in the next 4 years because we don't want to do this.
That's a great point. This is an immediate response.
Right.
So this is, that wasn't real clear.
Well, 4 years is...
But
We're still going to need a bill.
You're still going to need, this is immediate, you're still going to need a short term, a long term, and a very long term. And it may be some of the same. But right now, what are you going to do next year, or if you decide to wait until the next year? Next year, even. What are you going to do next year because you have some growth? What are you going to do when that class crosses the line and now has to be addressed? That's part of the plan.
Dr. Burns, if I may also.
Please.
This is trying to paint a little bit of picture of pain for you. What the pain is going to be out there.
It's working.
Then you can use that. You can use that to help inform you for decisions about the bond. Which you're going to have other pains with making changes with the bond. Now you can compare the pains.
I know, but I can't sell a bond based on just new schools. And that's what I'm afraid if you say you won't do combine these classrooms and things, we're going to come back with us needing more schools, it's going to be hard to sell that
We're going to
bond.
have to do something.
Well, I'm still going to have to sell some. We have to build some. Okay.
No, I'm not saying the building.
No. Yeah, I know we have to do something. Okay.
We won't be able to build quick enough, so
I understand.
we got to do something. Hold on, I got to go around the whole table. Keith.
All right.
I see all of your hands. I'm just going to go around.
We kind of touched on, I don't know if it's a parking lot issue or what, the double up piece. Being it's sort of a new term, I kind of wanted to hear from perhaps Kathy and Brian the benefits of that and how that compares to like team teaching, co-teaching, and how we might be able to use that as an advantage when it comes to mentoring other teachers, how we can take this new concept and find somewhere to get some benefit out of it, I guess. I don't know if there's time for that now or if that's a later parking lot.
I was just
kind of
gonna
work
comment on
session
that,
or something. Because I think I did hear you say earlier that teachers were kind of excited about it. I think
Double numbers.
yeah.
I do think, just to not go too far into it now, but it would be entirely appropriate and expected for us to provide some opportunity for schools that are considering doing this with some guidance around best practices, some schools that are already doing it successfully, and teachers that are doing it well. Because, the school that Dr. Martin read at has a few of these classrooms, and they've been very positive about it. There's one in the western part of the county where they really like the way that it's working. And so I think there is an opportunity to learn and sort of establish some best practices around how to do this that we would need to support teachers with.
Well, I'm a professional development. Two teachers, it's not a double up or if it's a marriage. It's not built for everybody, so really being thoughtful and deliberate about how to choose the right teachers and be strategic about that. It's something that we are already in the process of developing.
You can see Roxy and me co-teaching there already.
Oh.
And
I've seen that.
That would work really well.
To the moon. In case you'd have to be our TA. Oh, you'd be the principal. Sorry.
And then the benefit for kids.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know what that is now.
Well, I think unless you have...
And I can think, I guess...
Yeah, unless you have double the number of students, you technically have a lower ratio of adults to students, right? And I think there is, if the match is good and the pedagogy is good and the planning is good, then you have multiple opportunities to really provide some more individualized instruction than you may be able to do otherwise.
And can I add to that there might be some possibilities too that it would increase collaboration amongst teachers that we're always trying to say in a very authentic way. Yeah. If you think of a brand new teacher and a veteran teacher, and they happen to be the ones in the room, and each one of them has students, there's a possibility of really having more value if everything is right. It could possibly be the lemonade you're making out of lemons.
That's right.
But it's just that you have to have the appropriate...
All the conditions have to be correct.
And the conditions have to be correct.
We'll go back this way.
When I listen to all this, it sounds like we're trying to come up with, there's 4 things here. Do we go north, south, east, or west? It sounds like every one of them has a but to it. What I've heard the most of here is the double up is sounding like there's great potential for benefits here. And the idea of 2 teachers for up to maybe 30 kids, that's a much lower ratio than we're looking at. So for me, that double up is sounding pretty good.
And I would add, and everything Mr. Agee said is factual. The funding provided from the state will not cover effectively that class that is 1 student over the threshold that has 2 teachers in it, or let's say 5 students over. And we're not going to know it until we live it, but I think in many cases, perhaps most cases, those students aren't going to come in nice packages such that we can distribute the cost of an additional teacher over a reasonable number of students. We have no way to predict that. We have no, we've looked at that. We have no way to estimate it. When we talk about the budget in the next section, I'm going to mention a reserve we have for the current year to address that. But again, that's sort of the flip side of the benefit of the lower class size.
That's why I said every one of them has a butt. Every one of them has a butt.
Great job at doing your job, Mr. Dieter. Bring us right back to that earlier conversion chart.
So, the middle school I attended, and also my 5th grade class, were part of the 1970s open concept classroom.
Yeah.
And it was an adjustment, but we all figured it out, and nobody, sometimes there was collaboration between the two teachers, sometimes it was, this group over here, this group over here, and I think, but I also hear but it comes with dollar signs. So,
well, there's a cost either way.
Right, but I also see that the computer labs are starting to go the way of
The open classroom.
as we have this, we don't need this.
We had a superintendent once who said, "We don't have a pencil and paper lab, do we?" Why do we have a computer lab?
That's ours.
This is sort of coming from my principal experience in terms of, I'm thinking of all the kinds of benefits to doubling up and maintaining the fidelity of space for all kinds of children that need that. And so here's some other things that just jumped out at me. You double up, you've got 2 teachers in there. One of them gets the flu, okay? They have to go home for a week. You still have a certified teacher in there running that classroom. You've got a substitute in there, but you've got a teacher in there telling that substitute, and I think you won't have any trouble getting a substitute to co-teach with the teacher, okay? Another advantage is when you do the long-term family leaves and you have a teacher that's out for 30 days. I'm sorry, for 3 months or 4 months. Now, the first portion of it until they run out of sick leave is just a substitute. It's not a long-term substitute. So in terms of pay and you would get more substitutes and be willing to do that in a double up. Something as a principal, okay, I want to know who's going to be pregnant this year, right? I don't want to put 2 really young ones together, probably. Yes, okay, I figured that one out. Okay, I talked about the substitutes. Here's another thing on the substitute, the double up happens. Sometimes this double up happens within the first 20 days of school. Okay, all of a sudden, particularly in some of our year-round schools where, oh my gosh, they come in, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to be here in July. Now you have this huge influx in August. You have to hire new teachers. Well, if you know that you're going to double up, you can go ahead and hire a substitute till you get that teacher so that the kids aren't suffering. They're still getting, even though the one teacher's doing a little bit more work, okay, to do that. And this one just got me. Money. I'm always about flexibility. We've got so much flexibility taken away. So if I've got 2 certified teachers, particularly, even if it's 30 in a class, that's 15. That's a nice number of children to have, okay? Do I really need a teacher assistant? Because I'm allotted teacher assistants based on enrollment, not by grade. So now I have some flexibility, and I look at my overall instructional program and I go, okay, just because it's kindergarten does not mean they need a teacher assistant. They need learning assistants. So I'm not going to put one there because I have a real need in 3rd grade, because I've looked at my data and I see that 3rd grade is the grade that needs the most help. I can now, as a principal, say, I'm going to put my resources into that 3rd grade. So I hadn't thought a lot about all these until today, but
So flexibility was on that.
there's some
But
there's
TA
some really
flexibility
good
is probably going to cover the whole, though, that David noted. If you've got 30 kids with 2 teachers and you're only funded for 2 teachers if you've got 36. So now you've got that hole. That's where your TA is probably going to get swallowed up.
But there's some
in
potential.
principle, yes.
In principle, right. So
Right now, the legislature limits our use of the teaching assistant funds. We cannot convert those for teachers.
right. Now, I didn't mean that.
Still
No, take the TA out of kindergarten and put it in 3rd grade, or put it in maybe even 4th
Fourth or fifth, where your need is.
You can do that, right?
Yeah.
For now.
Sending it, yes. Okay.
30 kids in a TA is much more manageable.
I can get rid of computer labs. I just don't like the isolation. I would much rather have a double up in a classroom where all of the kindergartners, teachers are together. It's a time thing. It really is, because some of our schools are pretty big, and just the simple. If you've only got 40 minutes for planning, by the time you drop your child off, you have to then you got a hightail it. I don't mind the computer lab, and I don't. The collaborative space needs to be defined. The collaborative space for student collaboration, okay, I would keep. Collaborative space for PLT work, it is wonderful to have that. But you can create, it's a nice perk, and teachers love it, but you can create, and you can figure out a way to use other spaces other than a classroom for that. So I would pay attention to what that collaborative space means.
I would echo the former principal. I think the only thing that I'll add, and I see you, Mr. Fletcher, is I would say that I think it's going to be based on your point around the flexibility of the schools. I mean, if I tell you today that's what my tolerance is I'd rather see specifically what the school's paid tolerance level is, because quite frankly, double up makes sense to me. However, if the classroom is tight, we actually have some big first graders now too.
Yes.
I mean, so for me, it really is about what can that school physically. All the conditions have to be right. I guess that's the only thing I would add to what Ms. Hartstein said.
I'm struggling with the financial teacher allocation.
Yeah.
When you talk about doubling up and having 24 students, where are the 2 teachers coming from if they're allocated at 1 to 18?
Yeah,
That's the whole, Mr. Fletcher.
That's the whole.
That's the whole.
It's very inefficient.
It is.
It doesn't use your resources well.
That's the but.
The kids don't come in nice, neat packages across the district, and that's the funding challenge. Because you're right, you're not going to get enough for one teacher, and a piece of the funding for the additional teacher, no matter where you put them, you can put them in a mobile unit for that matter. When you put the 2 groups together, you still don't have funding for 2 teachers. You have a teacher and a part. So that inefficiency is something that will have to be borne by the district.
It's a huge big but.
Okay, so
I see you, Kathy.
so that's my concern with the over-optimism about what the double-up can do, because we got to pay for that somehow.
Oh, I don't think it's optimism. I think we're realistic.
Well,
but it's dollars. Lots of
relative optimism, let's say that. Okay.
Well, I think it's
less
preference. I don't think
pessimistic.
it's-
Less pessimistic.
Yeah.
I was going to mention, I think that's also why you see some 4th and 5th grade class sizes going up, because you may be able to carve a position out of your 4th and 5th grade ADN that you use at the lower grade level. You're not earning a position in order to do it. There's a really delicate balance.
And the struggle there will be at the beginning of the year when you develop your organization, you might be able to do what Ms. Moore just shared. If the kid drops in January, February, now you've got to have that teacher. Granted, it won't be 10 months of employment. It'll be 5, 4, 3, 2 months of employment. But there'll still be an inefficiency in the cost there.
So just what she said about 4th and 5th, we have a much greater issue in our smaller schools in terms of managing this class size thing, because they don't generate as many positions. So going back to an earlier conversation, I'm wondering if there's some way to vary the allocation of the 4th, 5th grade positions and go ahead and get to the 24 in a small school environment so they can deal with those oversized classrooms more effectively next year. And I just put that on the table as a variation in the allocation strategy.
So I'm just thinking of, when I've been in older schools that have the particle board desks and the blue plastic molded chairs, and then being in the newer schools that have the flexible seating options. And just from a visual standpoint, it looks like the newer schools have more space because the furniture isn't as bulky and it's mobile. So from a facility standpoint, knowing that older furniture may need to get refreshed, do we look at allowing for more space in the classroom by putting a furniture refresh into our budgeting, whether it's through capital and renovation, right, or operations? Because if you take this giant table out, there's a lot more space for students. So just something from a facility standpoint to think about. It's not just the rooms in the building, it's the room inside the room, the space in the room, to be able to fit 30 kids and 2 teachers in a class.
We did that with the cafeterias.
Yeah.
Moved out the desk and the chairs and brought in the collapsible tables.
Yeah.
Use the room for more tables.
So I just wanted to help us with a little bit of the reality check on the dollars. I had done this when Dr. Merrill and I had talked with some of the legislators about the class size legislation and whatnot. You can go to our audit, our CAFR, and look at the total dollars that are spent, or the total number of teachers that we have K-5, and we can look at the total number of students K-5, and that gives us our ratio. And right now we are at 16.35 teachers per, 16.35 students per teacher K-5. That is our current ratio.
Regular classroom teachers?
This is what we list as structure. So we don't have a good way to have sorted that out. But my point is, this is where the dollars come from to pay for teachers. And so this is the fallacy in the current model that says appropriation and actual classroom size are the same thing. So where we are today in terms of appropriation, and this is the state appropriated teachers, not local, is we're at 16.35 students per teacher. When you look back through our history, the high was in 2011 was 17.04 students per teacher. So what we're talking about here, if we're going to force this class size to go down, then the actual numbers are going to go even lower than this. And yet the funding is, right, funding today gets us to 16.35 to 1. And we just keep that in mind when we're talking about the doubling the classrooms and whatnot.
Okay, are you satisfied?
I don't understand that math, but that's...
You look at our total number of teachers divided by the total number of students.
But what's included in that number of teachers is what my concern is.
Well, that's the CAFR.
I understand, but if it's including the enhancement teachers, for example,
so we have elementary
positions.
So we have elementary school teachers, of which we list for last year's audit.
We can talk about this later.
So
we don't need to do it.
It's not guidance, it's not psychological, and it's not other.
But enhancement.
But it is enhancement. So it does include those teachers.
It does include
that we're having to take out of this model.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is 4 teachers a school.
Because the state funded it by classroom.
We have 2 other areas
Yes,
that
we
we would
do.
like your thoughts on. Joe, do you want to just quickly show this? And then let's move to, we got stuck, but it was a good sticky
It was.
The next slides really don't provide any more info than the previous 2, other than it takes it down to actual individual school level, okay? Show you example for each one of those lines previous, the 4 options. We just show you a school example. This is an actual school. We didn't name it, but as you see, This is the double up version in which you see the number of classrooms needed, classrooms available, how many have to be converted, and we used the first option here. This school, we used the second option in which everything was available to use. And then I show you two together because, like I said earlier, they're similar. Art, music, and magnet are preserved, protected, but in the fourth option, we make sure not every classroom is used at that school, at each one of those categories. We preserve a classroom at least, or half of them actually, at each one of those levels. So it's just school level examples for each one of the options.
I still like the idea of preserving the magnet, music, and art spaces.
Absolutely.
I think we all do. I mean, I definitely do.
So we have this, Joe, for every school?
I do have a spreadsheet that has this for every school.
Good.
I have 4 spreadsheets. And then there's about 10 spreadsheets behind them that feed those 4.
Yeah, every school has been addressed.
Because you know we want data.
But that's how he got
That's how
to
we
the
got.
hierarchical data.
I wouldn't, as you know, every school's going to handle their situation the best they can.
Right.
And then each one gives you, like this, different options? Or?
No, it can. He does. He has 4 spreadsheets. He's got for each of the schools, each of the options, which I think is of value. But from a policy point of view, I think you need to be up here, so that's what he had to do to get to the point.
made this.
He would give you something that would not drown you in data.
And those spreadsheets have that. Yeah. And those spreadsheets actually have about 3 or 4 times more columns on them.
No, much appreciated. I was just asking.
Okay. May we move on to same process for allotments and funding? Good with that? All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Need a paper for this?
This one from before.
We go back to the other paper, or we just go
We're here to talk, have conversation.
Okay.
Not so much presentation.
Okay. I love it.
And I guess the most recent conversation based on the doubling up may be a good place to start. And Mr. Blomberg asked me a question off the side I'd like to share with everyone. Catherine and I talked about it. The decisions have not been made, but the question was, are you going to require each school to meet the average, or are you going to just deal with it at the district level? Good question. And Kath, you want to share your response?
So I think it put us in a really good position this year to tell all schools they needed to meet the district average. And it's really ensured us. I mean, I had nightmares about coming in at over 20 or whatever the district average was and how we would answer to that. But I think that we recognize that we have some schools that are more crowded than others. And that is why those schools are implementing some of the things that you see on that spreadsheet now in order to make sure that they're meeting the 20 that we told them they had to meet this year. I think it's still better for the entire district, this is my opinion, Kathy's speaking, for us to ask them all to meet whatever the district average is that we set and then deal with those who are unable to do so on an individual basis to assess what their needs and fix might look like.
Can I just suggest, though, that this might be part of our differentiated resourcing conversation? Because, again, I think pedagogy needs to come first. I mean, obviously, we have to meet the state law. But there are settings where a smaller class size probably has a bigger impact on the kid than others.
And just to complete that thought that I had, because if you don't ask all of your schools to meet the district average and you allow some on the front end to go over, you must have some that are below in order to meet the district average.
Right, so each class can go up 3 above the limit, right? So if that school, if every class is going 3 above the limit, then that school is hurting you big time on the averages, right? So, but I understand your point completely. That's why I asked the question: are you going to do it school by school and try to do it that way, And so what I'm hearing is the initial point would be each school should endeavor to do that, and then they should come to you all with exception, like we need relief.
That would be my recommendation.
And then you can look and say, well, we think we can get some relief here or there, or, to be able to make the average district-wide.
Well, then you've got room for growth during the year.
Right.
If you're maxed out day one, all you can do is reorganize.
I think, and to your comment, pedagogy should come first. I guess how do we balance that or sort of balance that? I'm reminded of the conversation we just had the other day on student achievement, and we were talking about suspensions, and I was saying students were hurting, and I think you made the comment, Kathy, that, yeah, you want to always think about students or put students first, but in that, there are those, I don't think you used this wording, but the unintended consequences on your principals and administration and that sort of thing too. So I'm not sure that we can always say pedagogy. I mean, we love for pedagogy to come first, but that may not be the practical. Unfortunately, the practical reality that it may not be able to come first because we have this legislative mandate.
So coming back, allotment scenarios. I was going to bring this up at the beginning of the budget presentation. Go ahead and bring it up now. You'll recall this morning Terry presented two scenarios, 3-year and a 4-year implementation of the state allotment formulas. We discovered a slight error in one of the formulas on the 3-year implementation. It doesn't change the implication. It still basically has savings in the first year, costs in the second year, savings in the third year, and a kind of a kick the can at the front end and a big balloon payment at the end. We will get you an updated sheet, though, as well as a post-revised updated sheet. Again, it changed the dollars, but not the overall trend and not the distinction between the 3 and the 4 years. We'll share that with you. We had in our current year budget a reserve and fund balance. I guess the reserve was placed actually at the end of last year's budget of $2.4 million, give or take, to address class size issues. We didn't know what we were going to be facing, and that's for the current year. We have utilized most approaching fumes of that funding to address both allotment reconciliation issues as well as class size issues. That was for the current year and the current year requirements. We've been talking about, as we look forward to next year, again, possibly a 3 or 4, maybe a 4-year phased implementation to the new formula. You saw what some of those costs are. I'm going to share them again with you in the budget section. Local costs that it would require to do that, to meet the benefit needs of the additional state fund that teachers, as well as staying within the formula. At this point, we have no reserve and fund balance for addressing, let's say, unforeseen things associated with class size, like all of a sudden, a hypothetical, every one of our schools, elementary schools, has 2 classes that have to double up based upon just 1 or 2 or a handful of students. Well, we've got 100-some schools times 2 teachers. Let's say if there were 2 double-ups in each school. That's a couple hundred teachers at an average cost of about $65,000 per teacher. Mark, is my math correct? $2.4 million? No. Another zero. $44 million.
Right.
That was high.
$6 million to put 1 teacher in each elementary school, rough number.
So these are all unforeseen. We're going to be working through this. You'll hear about this again as we come back with a proposed budget on April 10th. That being said, our unassigned fund balance, and again, the purpose of today isn't to get into the numbers, but it's been coming down and down and down and down. And so there is not a lot of room for play there. So I just throw this as not for any decisions, but sort of setting the stage for the budget, kind of crossing the boundaries here of the next section. But this allotment piece has a direct implication. The allotment piece / the class size requirement has a huge potential implication for our local funding.
Yeah. I mean, when you say that our $2.4 million reserve for allotment reconciliation and class size implementation is on fumes, what does that mean?
We've used it, and that was
gone.
And that's a one-time reserve. That's not recurring.
So it's just like zeroed out, or there's like $5 pretty much.
That's what he means.
Yes, and again, that's a non-recurring revenue source, so there is no reserve for next year at this time.
And the positions that we allocated to schools from that category this year were for one time. So they end at the end of the fiscal year, and the schools don't retain that position that was beyond formula this year. It resets.
So if you would, why don't we go back, if you would, go back to the 3- and 4-year formula that Terry had handed out this morning. And if you look at the 4-year sheet first, again, in the first year, you'll see there was a total local cost of $1.1 million to begin phasing in towards the state formula. That does not include additional teachers to address these unpredictable gaps in coverage that we've been talking about here. That is just to allot at the 1, 2, the various numbers. And again, when we have looked at, we really don't know. We have some schools that grow more quickly than we project and vice versa. We address that during the allotment reconciliation process. But that being said, because the threshold is one student over when we have one student over the threshold, we've got to pull a trigger. There's really no margin of error and little margin of predictability. But I would ask, given that, and then looking at the 3-year option, and let me share with you with that correction, just so you can get a general sense, and again, push this out electronically. The change on this sheet, it showed a total savings of $2.2 million in the first year. It was actually a savings of It was actually a savings of $4.7 million at the very bottom. The next cell stays the same. The next cell stays the same, and that final cell stays the same.
So in the yellow,
in the first column, it's close to 4.8 million more savings. Everything else stays the same.
Here.
We're on the second page.
And again, we'll push this out to you
We're
electronically.
getting another one for us.
But the bottom line is, it's the same implication.
Yeah.
Savings in the first year and kicking everything else down the road.
Having 11 million.
Yes. Just because I'm not a teacher or education background, so your teacher allotment from the state, I think I know all I know no answers, are when you always round down, they round down this teacher allotment, right? Like if you students, like the number of students, if you have like a few positions that you would get by dividing your students with 0.2, they go down.
The way that Wake County school system pushes allotments to schools, we round down to the nearest whole position.
That's Wake County Public Schools.
What does the state give you?
The state calculates it on a formula based on our projected student figures, and it's not rounded, it's to the nearest month. So they allot it that way, and then they will reconcile it on the second month average daily membership. If we come in low, they would reduce half what is due back. If we come in a certain amount higher than the projection, we could request additional resources. But they also decrease our allotments for some other things, such as charter school adjustments, virtual public school, and there's some subtractions that come in there also.
But the distinction, or a distinction, is the state allots to us as a district one number, total student population.
Right.
We are then having to allot to 180 some schools.
And we
based
allot
on
down by
individual-
class.
Correct.
And they only, even in high, and I know this answer is stupid, so in high growth counties like Wake County, they only look at you again one more time. No matter that you have students coming all year long. Has that ever, do they talk about that ever?
No. This has been a source of contention for a very long time. You square up on the 40th day, and as Joe described, if you are under the projection, you have to return half typically if you're over, and it seems to me it's 1% or some number of kids over, they'll consider squaring up with you, but they don't always do that. So you're almost guaranteed to lose the half if you don't make it. You're not almost guaranteed to get the amount above.
We do nothing good for growth.
Nothing different. You get what you get on the 40th day. So if we continue to grow between the 40th and the 180th day, and make it work.
Okay. I knew that, but it was so astounding.
And you had
good business practice.
You had good discussion when this was shared initially. Shared your thoughts about one or the other. If you have other thoughts, this is your chance to help us know, does a 3-year phase-in make sense? Does a 4-year phase-in make sense? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, before I get to that, I just have a question. So we had the 2.4 million reserve. What would be the desired or adequate reserve in order to, I mean, we don't know what we're going to need when, but what would be the appropriate, where we would feel comfortable having, what would be that? What would that look like? Or is that too much to speculate?
No, I mean, you should know.
No, until you have some trend data, it's going to be really hard to look back and grab it.
Right.
And so I'm thinking in a couple of years you can estimate that, but as Mr. Nader shared, this is unforeseen, it's not predictable, and every allotment after the 40th day will not be for 10 months, it'll be for the months remaining in the year. And so as you get closer to the end, if you reach that limit and have to go to the next teacher to make it work, it'll be a declining number of months. And so how do you grab it? He did an estimate of 2 per school.
And that was just...
and I don't know how to respond to that until you get some trend data.
Well, no, we know it's going to be more than 2.5 million because it's only March and the kids are still moving.
Yes, I think that was a fair assumption.
But I mean, we need to know something. I mean,
And that $2.5 million reserve was to comply with this year's requirements.
Not
next year's are totally different. And we will come back when we present the superintendent's proposed budget with some likely request associated with that. but again, knowing its accuracy
No, yeah, I mean,
is really going to be dependent on history.
right, and we don't have that.
To update Dr. Martin's number, if there are 10 months needed for every elementary school, regardless of when the teacher's needed, that'd be $7.345 million.
And that's just one position.
That's 10 months per school would be $7.3 million.
And we've got schools that are.
Yeah.
65.
I think to answer your question, me personally, I think I would like the 4-year approach more so than the 3-year. I think, as Ms. Mahaffey touched on earlier, the balloon payment at the end, I think you mentioned too. Much more reasonable with the, based on this, the 3.6 than the 11.
I don't feel one way or the other because I don't know what the impact this year for schools. So I can't say. I like the approach for the 4, but I just don't know what the impact for the schools immediately would be.
So, appreciate it.
Well, I guess, I mean, I'll wade in too on the long range plan. I mean, and I think that's the most likely scenario that we can have good conversation with our commissioners as well, because some want to oversimplify things and say, let's have a formula. I have yet to know any formula that's going to be able to deal with the reality of what we have to deal with, because there are just too many variables to put into a formula. I mean, I can probably work out a formula for you, but it's not going to be some y is equal to mx plus b. It's going to be a whole lot more complicated than that. But this is a long-term sustainable approach to deal with a relatively acute crisis. And I think we've got to just keep pushing that sustainability argument. But there's a difference between sustainability and simple formula.
I'll reintroduce, I'll restate my support for the 4-year plan.
All right, are we good on that one? The last section and then take a break. How about that? Okay, we can talk about staffing and recruitment just for a moment.
Is that your go-to?
I'm not bringing you any of that.
No, don't do that.
I don't have that.
David, you look like you've been abandoned. You looked over like, where are my friends?
When this was presented earlier, you got some data, some ideas were placed on the table. Great questions about recruitment efforts. A little ahead of where we wanted to be, which is great, same as with the funding and allotment. But some of the ideas were to consider other places to recruit in response to the K-3 change, other places to recruit, how we deal with applicants. Mr. Fletcher put on the table, or at least asked a question about a permanent substitute pool. Are there other things that you'd like to share for this team in HR to consider as part of a plan to address the staffing and recruiting needs? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if we can ever afford it, but if we can figure out a way that we can pay a long-term substitute at the teacher pay the day they enter, it is the thing that's so awful about it is that, rightly so, the person that goes out on sick leave or family leave does not need to have anything to do with the school. They're entitled to that. But the school still has to run. And if you have it works differently in smaller schools than bigger schools. But if you are sitting, and with the class size, and only 2 5th-grade teachers, and one of them goes out on maternity leave, then there's one teacher left that does all the planning, all the conferencing, all the grading, all of the testing. They're the ones that are responsible for it, unless the principal decides to pull the IRT off of their job, or pull off someone else to serve in that capacity. It's not good for the kids, and it's hard to get people to say, I'm going to come in there. We do have a few people that give it for free. They walk in that day as a long-term sub and do all the lesson planning, all the grading, and all that. So I don't know where that is in the future, but that would be...
Could be parking lot, that one.
Yeah, well, you asked me to give you a suggestion.
Okay, yeah.
Parking lot, the reason I mentioned Mr. Fletcher's is that was in the context of having licensed, qualified teachers ready to drop in. Potentially, if you had a need to reduce that amount of time. And I think that was the context.
That would be very valuable.
Adding that for them.
And there's a cost there because, as Ms. Hartenstein was saying, if you would probably have to pay them a higher rate to get them in that permanent pool and keep them there, potentially. We'd have to look at that.
$100 a day.
Any other thoughts about what we're doing with recruitment, especially and dealing with the need for additional teachers? May not be much, because you did a good job before.
The only thing that came to mind was whether an early contract is an open invitation to all of Wake County schools, or whether it might be constructed around a set of schools. So as opposed to having 113 elementary schools, there are 20, and we'll find a great position for you to spread your wings here.
I don't know what early contract means.
But 2 years ago we did that with the ESM schools, and we froze all other schools into.
Right. Not instead of what you're saying, but I will say historically, we let principals know we've got 100, 150 early contracts that we can offer. To my knowledge, we have never used them all as a district.
Well, the issue for our challenge schools is still fit. I mean, it's still fit. It's a...
Well, we talked about this a lot yesterday, but I think it's the same point, is our recruitment has, at both the teacher and principal level, has been a very self-selected model. And I don't think we want to get to a completely directed model. No. But that would be problematic. But we need a little bit more of the intentional engagement as opposed to just self-selection. So I'd be very much in favor of that becoming part of our recruitment strategy.
I'd be interested to know what that would look like in terms of getting the teacher in the classroom, especially post start of school, versus the principal having to go out and find the person on Appletrack. And even if you have a pool of people ready to go, like, hey, we have these 50 people that we've already vetted, find the person that fits your school from here and they're ready, versus go out, right, make sure their license is good, let's do the background check, all that sort of thing. Especially
I'm not sure what keeps those people hanging around if they're looking for a job.
Well, maybe they're subbing in the meantime. I don't know. I mean, there are people who can, not everybody can afford that flexibility. Right. That's for sure. And so there would be a little bit of inequity there, but
I can't remember what it's called, but it's pretty much that you answered it, Ms. when he asked about the soft skills. So whatever the talent, yes, match fit. So is that pool, do you do that on that pool or no? Is the match fit already?
Every applicant completes Teacher Fit. It's actually, I think it's called Teacher Fit. They corrected me yesterday. Every applicant does that, and when you look at the actual applications, there is a score associated with that. If you click on the actual score, it takes you to the different categories that they answer questions on. It's a personality profile index. Right. So every applicant is required to complete that when submitting for a licensed teacher position.
I guess I'm going back to ease for hiring. Like, is it consolidated in a way that you're not still requiring somebody has to click through all those pieces? I guess I'm just trying to figure out is there a way to streamline it in such a way that, again, creating the balance between administrator autonomy, but also having this pool very tidy, so that a principal, if they wish, could actually, because for me, if you tell me you have something, that's great, but if I'm still going to have to do all the work, then it's not great.
Yeah, some way you can filter for what you're looking for.
So that's what I'm curious about. Is there a way to make it a succinct process for them?
So I guess one more thing I'd add to the recruitment selection is, and I know we do elements of this, but this needs to be a strong element of principal professional development. I mean, as our board is recognizing, search processes are not easy. What questions do you ask? How do you evaluate the candidates? I know I've been on search committees where we had 400 applicants for one position. How do you sort through? And this comes, training in unintended bias, to best fit, to who knows what. Principal training in hiring needs to be part of our recruitment process.
For another day, I think the whole idea of leadership development, teacher leaders to assistant principals to principals, essential services, was an area of the district that could warrant review. What is being done to prepare folks for the principalship and to engage them and make sure their skills are as they should be. I think that's a perfect topic for that.
And that's both for the hiring process and the retaining process, right? Because personnel management is a pain in the right? But learning skills to do that well creates a great working environment, which also improves retention, and thus we get less turbulence. And
it kind of starts with doing evaluations, doesn't it?
Well, that's an important component of it. It actually starts before the evaluation, because if I don't empower before I do the evaluation.
I understand. I'm just, just making touch points.
Yep. Are we close on this one? Any other comments, or would you like to take a break? Mr. Sutton has
just a quick one. And we had, maybe not quite a year ago, you all had brought us a presentation on advanced roles for teachers, and I don't know if we had stopped that work or where we were. I know we had said that at that time we were thinking about applying to the state for the advanced roles pilot project, but that those dollars did not fit the strategic plan.
Right.
And so we kind of pulled away. But to your point, in terms of the leadership piece, obviously not every teacher wants to go into administration, which is a good thing because you still want your best teachers in the classroom. So I don't know if there's a place for that advanced roles, teacher leadership roles piece, and then if that helps in this regard, but it might be a time to maybe think about that strategy and how that might be a conversation.
Mr. Agee, do we have any idea about if a teacher applies and they interview with a principal and they're not selected, how many of them don't make themselves available for another interview?
Don't have that data.
That's an interesting question, Mr. Agee. I know I've received lots of emails of people who get frustrated with our process because there's so many teachers at Apple Tracks that they let it go.
Well,
it's an interesting process.
Anecdotally, I think I've heard that there are a lot of applicants who are confused about the lack of communication following an interview. It's just there's no communication following an interview that they're not being successful in. That's not good for us. It may be necessary from a time standpoint, but it's certainly not good for our relationships.
Would that? No.
I think it
kind of ties into the PD piece that Dr. Martin mentioned, the principal professional development in regards to the hiring,
Doesn't take that long to send an email.
Exactly.
An AppleTrack it has a built-in, you can build in an automatic communication that says, they don't have to craft it.
If they're using
If they're
AppleTrack.
using it, yeah. It's in AppleTrack, but again, it's back to the whole notion of we have a service, and if it takes more work for them to do it without us giving them reminders and training, then it's a tool that's unused. And so that goes back to our side of the organization and the PD part. And I think that's a perfect place for it.
Well, it's like so many things. There are so many things that need to be done, it can be pretty overwhelming. But with a good set of professional development, all of a sudden you now have a structure to make it happen, and you actually end up getting more done in a more efficient fashion that initially was overwhelming if there's good PD.
You ready for a break? Then we can come back and finish up the budget.
There we go.
Thank you.
It depends on the day, is what I understand.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't it over 25,000, and that was down to 10?
It's a MacBook Air.
A MacBook Air.
I know, that's why.
Which is
No, there is?
It's the old model. So
Okay. But mine doesn't have a USB.
Yeah, that's the only reason I haven't gone to
Stand
the
behind it,
I have a
doesn't have that anymore.
We are now talking about technology, so yes, you can begin.
Okay, can we bring it home with the budget update now?
I mean, perhaps we could bring it home.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon again.
We'll give you what I think is going to be a relatively brief update on the 2018-19 budget development process. Some of this was presented at the January 31st Finance Committee meeting. We're going to also bring some additional things because beyond the growth in the number of students, the opening of new schools, and the other needs for local funding, as you've already heard, House Bill 90 brings a number of direct implications on our local funding needs. So you can hear about that. Some you've heard. You're going to see a little more detail. So as far as process changes, the biggest change we made this year was to integrate the strategic planning team into the very front end of the budget development process. In prior years, we brought them in midstream. And in particular, we sought input from the team, and I'll describe who this team is on the next slide. I'm looking at the growth category, the program continuity category, and the new focus area category. And if I look at this from the 50,000-foot level, growth and program continuity kind of keep us in place. We're not doing anything new. And growth and program continuity compete for those same constrained resources that might be available for investing in new endeavors. So, and then finally, as we look at this 50,000-foot levels we've shared with you before, we firmly believe their strategic plan should lead the budget and not vice versa. That being said, we continue to operate in a world of constrained resources, so we do not fully control what we can reinvest in our system. The strategic planning team first identified focus areas for the coming year, and then we looked at how we can fund those focus areas within existing resources. We're not going to get into the details of that today, what we looked at repurposing. We will likely share some of that with you when we present the superintendent's budget. And again, to give you an idea of who's involved with the strategic planning team, the superintendent, much if not most of the superintendent's leadership team, school administrators, some other leadership within the district, down at the senior director level. So it's a very comprehensive group that's been involved with this. And again, this was shared with you back in November at a Finance Committee meeting. I'm not going to read through this, but these are the primary focus areas that the strategic planning team came up with to look at. And it's broken down into there as human capital, community engagement, and then the academic side of learning and teaching, balanced assessment, and achievement. So again, just as a refresher today, these are the areas that we are focusing on some level of new investment or programming for the coming year. I'll just take a minute and let you look at that. So, growth continues, which means increased operating cost growth. The growth component is a significant driver to our overall operating budget. And that growth drives the operational costs as we open new schools. We'll be opening 4 new schools next year, 2 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high. The cost, the operating cost of that, again, in the $6 million range, just for opening those new schools. That's utilities, that's custodial, that's the staffing that is not student number dependent. It's got to have a principal. It's got the other core things in it. So these are things that are going to be there whether there's 1 student in that school or 500 students in the school. So again, significant investment in operating costs to open 4 schools. Then there's the other side of growth, and that's the staffing costs that come with the student growth. Our projections for this coming year are to have an increased number of students just under 2,000. Terry's the number what? 1,800. And along with that, using current formulas, comes state resources. We'll get additional state resources with the growth. But along with that, based on our formulas and things like the local salary supplement for teachers, comes additional local funding costs. And our estimate of that is in the $5 million range right now. Those are some examples of the categories. And on this next page, I'll show you what that looks like in terms of dollar estimates.
David, so I'm trying to get in the mind and play a commissioner, his mind of thinking, and so I can see that these are the $6 million and $5 million are costs to open the new school. They're ongoing costs. They're not one-time costs. So when they become ongoing, don't they become part of the per capita? And so the challenge that I hear being challenged is, wait a minute, isn't that already in your per capita? Your per capita isn't really an itemized, but it's a global budget. So it's like we're asking for a step, and then that step to continue as per capita. So how do we better make that so that it's clear?
I think we can do that, and I think we haven't done it recently, but as I think back, perhaps 5, 6, or maybe longer years, there was a tendency on the part of some to say, well, this is your per capita funding now. You're adding this many students next year, regardless of what else you might be doing, like opening schools. So let's take your per capita times the number of additional students. That's the amount of funding you should need. And I think that's where...
That's one of the formula ideas, yeah.
Where you're speaking to, it's not that simple to take a historical per capita funding level and say that is meaningful in a future year, whether that's based on an increased cost of opening new schools and operating new schools from that point forward, or based upon something the state legislates.
So it's a challenge here as we're talking about a step growth as opposed to a linear growth.
Yes.
And the step growth is harder to formalize.
And these numbers here are for the district or for those 4 schools?
These are district-wide.
That's what I thought.
And these are now based upon our formulas for student growth, because not all those additional 1,800 students will be in those 4 new schools.
Right.
I think to support what David's saying, you've got to think about there's an increase in the insurance costs this year. So you can't just step it up. You've got an insurance increase. There's an increase in the matching retirement. There's a potential increase in utility rate. So it doesn't just step up. It isn't linear, because you've got to have those advances on top of your standard costs.
And you'll see some of those in a minute.
On the previous, or I guess even on the one we're looking at, it says $400K for counselors, social workers, psychologists. That's just to maintain our current level.
That is correct. That is not increasing. No. Okay. That's status quo. So again, growth continues, and with growth ultimately comes opening new schools and additional resource and the costs associated with it, as well as additional staffing resources, both for those new schools as well as for other schools that are absorbing additional students. Our estimate at this point is about $11 million of funding, additional funding, local funding, will be required to meet those costs for the coming years.
That is growth. That is in addition to the new schools, or that is inclusive?
That includes it. That is the new schools and the student growth together. About $6 million for the operating costs of the new school, $5 million associated with growth in the number of students, a total of $11 million to fund what we're calling growth, operating costs and staffing costs.
Local portion.
The local portion only, correct.
And that does not include what we looked at today. So this is on top of the 11.
Yes.
Just for growth. And
yeah,
okay.
that is
class
independent.
Size. Okay.
And we'll come back to that in a future slide as well.
Just making sure I understand.
And again, I will say funding growth just keeps us in place doing what we have been doing, just with more students and more schools.
And can I just, one more clarification. That is Wake County Public School growth. When we're talking about the local appropriation that we're going to need to argue for the commissioners, charter school growth gets added on top of this.
Yes, and we'll cover that in a future slide as well.
I'm just based on the arguments that I hear, they're often wanting to let growth be Wake County growth. And I think we need to do a better job of recognizing that growth is growth of students in Wake County. This is the fraction of WCPSS growth. This is the fraction of charter growth, because it's all growth. If you just talk about Wake County Public Schools growth and then divide that across Wake County Public Schools and charters, that's a net cut.
It's a 10% ding.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it. It's my understanding, speaking with Terry and Mark, that you had conversation about that at your BAC last week as well.
Yes, we regularly try to have that conversation.
Okay, so moving from growth to program continuity, and again, we touched on this. It was touched on in your January Finance Committee meeting. We want to talk a little bit more about it now, and in a second, I'm going to ask Karen to add a little bit of information to it, but really the main thing driving program continuity in this coming year's budget is in the special education area. And if I could sum up sort of again at the 50,000-foot level, over the last several years, we've been using carryovers and reserves to fund our needs. We've exhausted those carryovers and reserves. Our needs haven't changed. Not only have our needs haven't changed, our needs are increasing. And so we've got a gap of about $8 million.
Can I just ask about that gap? And I mean, we heard this in Finance Committee as well. And again, the thing that comes back sometimes to us is, did we not anticipate this, seeing that we were using up these kinds of funds? We don't want to get into a situation where next year there's another gap that we should have anticipated but weren't. So, I mean, $8 million is a significant sort of differential number. We've heard elements of these kinds of things year over year. We've heard regularly that if we keep spending down our fund balance, it's going to come back to bite us at some point. This year it's coming back to bite us. But this specific $8 million, why didn't we know about it last year or the year before? Help us understand and communicate that.
I would share that we were largely aware of this. We are largely aware of other challenges as well. Mm-hmm. And to try to put it politely and respectfully, both during the recession and now in the recovery years, we've been in the recovery for a long period of time. We are still playing whack-a-mole, trying to juggle the needs associated with growth and doing some level of new initiative. Terry, Mark, I don't know if you want to add to that.
So was this on our threats list or our unfunded?
I do not believe it was on your potential risk list, but it's something we were aware of.
But it may be that becomes if we've got one-time funding providing a valuable service, right, maybe that's a category that gets added to our risk assessment.
Agree.
Okay.
And that helps both us and the commissioners, right?
It definitely helps us communicate it.
Yeah, they need to know this kind of.
We need to know.
Yeah, part of it was on the risk, but well taken. The Medicaid piece is one of the funding.
Also, this funding is divided by the charter school population that has none of these students. Mm-hmm. So that's just frustrating.
Just follow the stuff.
So Karen, can I ask you to come up and share some additional just background on this?
So I think folks in finance heard much of this, and the story is exactly what we said. We carry positions, carried forward our growth into ARA funds and carryover funds as far as we could. And to Dr. Martin's question and Mr. Fletcher's follow-up and David's comment, we did have growth cases that we put forward, but we also balanced those against what we had in carryover because the rest of the district also had requests that were put in there. And at that time, we had the pot of money that you could dip into when other areas didn't. So it's not that folks were unaware, and in fact, I was running around like Chicken Little every time I possibly could, but we worked for an entire district. So you're balancing the needs of everyone when you're moving these kinds of things forward. And again, just to talk about the kinds of things that contribute to where we go, when we grow a school, we need to staff that school in terms of providing students with specially designed instruction. And the two categories for that are general content students and students who are on adapted curriculum. And general content students, there are formulas that drive from the state how we provide those services. There are also in Wake County the kinds of things that we do around providing rich and robust services in general content, not just in special education. And how do we match those specially designed instructional opportunities with the content that we're providing? The area that causes me actually the greatest amount of concern right now is, of course, we have not had a per pupil increase from the state in special education, I think, since 1992. Wow. So that has remained pretty flat. Our overall growth in students with disabilities that are coming to Wake County isn't coming in the leaps and bounds that it was even 3 years ago. Where that difference is we are seeing a smaller percentage of the students who come into Wake County who are on general content and receiving cross-categorical resource services, and a greater percentage of students who are moving into classrooms who require more intensive services. Frequently, so when we're talking about a teacher that can serve 32 students on their caseload, if we're talking about one of our programs with more significant need, that teacher is serving 8 students and frequently has 2 to 3 teaching assistants with them. So the cost of the population of students that we're getting in Wake County cost us more than the overall growth would indicate. And I think I gave you the example that between July and December of this year, we had 90 families move into Wake County, not that just needed special education services, but needed the more intensive special education services that we typically provide in our regional programs. And I think I showed you the number of student growth in that. And right now, I think I have like 9 classrooms that I could open just based on the growth that we have. I don't really see that changing. We are in the triangle for all the reasons that we see companies that want to come to the triangle area and to Wake County. Frequently, the percentage of population also have students with disabilities that come with that. If you're going to choose where you're going to live, we're in the middle of 3 comprehensive hospitals. There are a number of private services that are available that receive private insurance funding as well as Medicaid insurance funding. So the kinds of things that contribute to our growth aren't going to go away. I anticipate we have that same growth, and I anticipate my needs in terms of staffing that will continue. And in fact, I was having that very conversation about where am I going to find a person before I walked in here today. I'm happy to talk about the specificity of those kinds of classrooms or what we're doing in general content classrooms, because we're doing some really fabulous things here. I think you all know that we provide in general content teachers who provide support to children with autism in general content, and we also support children with behavioral difficulties who are also served in general content.
I think Dr. Martin was wearing a commissioner's hat.
I've been trying to
with his question.
I think it's wise.
Right, and basically, because I think that's the way we have to approach the budget this year. And so a question I have is, right, didn't we, after we didn't get the $21 million extra that we asked for, didn't we appropriate another, I think it was $13.9 million from our unrestricted fund balance to cover costs this year? We did that saying we're taking our fund balance down way below where it should be, but is it fair to say that had we gotten the requested appropriation, we would not have taken that 13.9, and therefore we would not have this $8 million risk? It might have been a $4 million risk instead of an $8 million risk. But right, my commissioner hat needs to go on and say, is this $8 million risk because of...
Sure. So the mechanics of that are, for this year, last year, and several years prior to that, I have growth cases that I submit. I have other cases that I submit. When I'm able to fund those cases from carryover and not impact the general ask that the district is pushing forward, then I'm joining the district to balance the needs of the district. So in actuality, in a perfect world, I would have moved those requests forward for funding in that similar kind of way. Now, to be perfectly clear, we have had some increase in local funding over those years. That increase has not matched what I've asked because we've been able to draw from this, the carryover that we had.
And that carryover is carryover within your department, or are we talking part of the broader unrestricted fund balance?
This is carryover in special education services, specifically, I don't know why I can't talk today, specifically from Medicaid and federal funding.
And would that, does that carry over, would it always stay in that category, or would that ever become part of other unrestricted funds?
No, it always stays within special education. And of course, because of the unpredictability of my needs, I like to have a cushion and carryover in order to meet what are very unpredictable needs for students. At this time, I have nothing.
And the carryover in Title 16B, which is the federal dollars this is coming from, have been steadily declining and now are completely used. So it wasn't a sudden decline. It has been steadily coming.
10 years worth.
It would be helpful, I guess, in this process. I'm assuming this won't be the first case where on your last bullet where you've got previous funding source no longer exists. So was the previous funding source state or federal? I'm assuming in this case it was IDEA funding that was cut. And then are we asking the county to replace
That's a great question.
that funding? I think that'll help in terms of presentation, sort of thinking through what was the previous source that's no longer exists, and then are we going to the county commissioners to ask them to replace what funding was cut or not? What is the plan around that?
So we will continue to receive federal funding, and I will continue to receive some reimbursement in Medicaid. So it's not like those funds won't come into play for this year. However, if you think of fund balance as a savings, and I've been drawing from that savings every year, the savings are gone.
So let me...
Where did the savings get generated from in the first place? I think that's to Mr. Sutton's point.
ARA funds.
Right.
So actually two places. ARA funds about 10 years ago, and Medicaid reimbursement is like a fickle friend. So we get reimbursed for services that we provide in the district. And there were several years where the state did not release our reimbursement at all. They just kept it for a while. And then they released it at one time. So rather than it being like Christmas, we used those same savings for carryover to do exactly what we were doing with federal funding.
There have been times with Medicaid, as that revenue has fluctuated, that we've made decisions to move positions from local onto Medicaid to alleviate local for a period of time when we had some additional resources there.
That's a great point.
And then as that comes back down, those positions must migrate back off of Medicaid. So Medicaid is not predictable like some of our federal funds that we generally know approximately what we may receive each year.
So Karen, when you talked about the 90 that came in, that's not counting the children that were living in Wake County in July that were 2.5, almost 3. You already knew about them. These are people you didn't know about at all.
Came into new living places in Wake County.
And are most of them K-5? Or K-12 versus pre-K?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer to, but I can find the answer.
I'd be interested in that. And also, in May, can you bring us an updated number in May?
I can.
What happened? Because January is a good time when people move, but I don't think we're going to get many people moving in June for the last 2 weeks of school. So I'd like to know that.
And I would imagine that you also don't know how many students will be identified throughout the year. As we get to third grade, you might have a student who wasn't identified with an IEP or having a learning disability.
That's a great point. So we never know how many students are going to be identified. I will say where our biggest buckets of unpredictability are right now are pre-K moving to K and kids moving into Wake County. So when we expand our opportunity, as we should, to find, under Child Find, which is a federal mandate, preschool children who might be eligible for services, the more we increase our ability to find those children, the more we increase our need to serve those children.
You want to maybe speak to, Karen, the snapshot you do? I forget when it is. Is it the trend line when you look at snapshot of the total
in terms of our so when our truest, there is a December child count and an April child count, but our truest picture of how many students we're going to have actually happens in May. It's before seniors graduate. It's before 3-year-olds move to school age. So we can count kids in the right buckets before they move. And steadily, we've been increasing in students with disabilities for the past 5, 6, 7 years, and probably more than that. Again, I want to point out that the state contribution per student
that's not checked.
So, and if you will just be mindful, when we talked about the kinds of services that we're providing to teachers, when we think about classrooms, we are thinking about a teacher, we are thinking about possibly a teacher and a teaching assistant. In the areas that we're getting the greatest amount of growth, we are talking about a teacher and at least 2 teaching assistants. We're talking about intensive occupational therapy, intensive physical therapy, intensive speech, frequently nursing. We contract with over 32 nurses, maybe 40 nurses at this point. So those services cost more than what it costs us to deliver services for cross-categorical resource. Now, we do have kids in general content who receive OT, PT, and speech, but those services are more brief, they're less intrusive in nature, and they cost less of a person to deliver.
The state formulation is one size fits all. It's not graded.
It's per child.
But it's a strict per child, it's not the category.
Doesn't matter what package that child comes in.
So you think special needs parents are great advocates for change usually. Are they working in the state legislature?
Not only are they working in the state legislature, if I had the word, they would go wild right now in terms of what they could do locally.
And they've had no effect for the increase in funding.
So from 1992, from the General Assembly, I don't know there are many opportunities and persons that are interested. So when you think about the voters that are contributing to somebody's seat in the General Assembly, the number of those parents who have children with significant disabilities are.
Do they still lobby for all of
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, we are locally, and EC directors, the current DPI EC director, we're lobbying to have an increase in per pupil expenditure for students with disabilities. We just don't have that.
I do believe that the legislative task force that is looking at the overall state funding for pre-K-12 education is considering looking at the special needs category and looking at subdividing it, realizing that not all children are the same.
Is that the same group that's ignoring sufficiency? Just looking at how money's spent?
I believe we're talking about the same group.
Okay, so they're going to look at how to distribute the existing pie differently. Okay.
Dr. Martin, if I might raise a couple points here, because you asked a very good question at the beginning, which is, won't people say, didn't you see this coming? There are a couple of threads here I'd sort of like to lift up. The unpredictability of this obviously mattered, as you can tell from this conversation. Did we know we would be here at some point? From what I understand, yes. Did we know it would be today? No. Because to Karen's point, there have been other needs throughout the years which jumped in front. And to David's point, that puts the district in this position of sort of playing whack-a-mole, to use his term, which leaves us as a district to say, here we are now. If we were to have listed every risk every year, I think from a communication standpoint, we would run the risk of not being listened to because the list would be so long.
And I get that. But we also have to recognize the vulnerability that we put ourselves in.
It's a little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yep. To a degree, this is a strategic initiative of our strategic plan. Yeah. Needs to be.
And what's the percentage of special ed students in our district?
It hovers between 12 and 13%.
It's about 22,000 is the number that we offer.
22,000.
It's really like closer to 21 right now. Well, the last time I counted, it'll be 22 by the time I get to May, but I don't want somebody to make me hold to a number that I can't.
We do approximate.
Now I'm like,
And Ed, about how many of our special education students are needing to be in a self-contained, whether it's AU or ID?
So I didn't bring the slides with those numbers on them. We have over 122 regional programs.
And that would be like visually impaired?
The minimum number of students, those, if you count 122 and just multiply by 10, which is about where the state would be, that gets you close.
Would we be able to capture, with the state funding staying the same, what our level of costs have gone up, obviously, because you're saying there's more intense, what our kids have more intense, would we be able to capture the two lines, this line and our line, and what that line would look like over time in terms of the increased cost per student on average?
I think we were toying with this yesterday. I think what we may be able to do is pick a sample general content student and a sample regional program student and see if we can compile that. There are a lot of complexities around that, but I think we would come closer rather than looking at total trends, looking at a sample student trend.
Thank you.
Okay, we've still got a little more budget to cover. Karen, thank you.
You're welcome.
So moving into the area of what we're calling state legislative impact. These are things that the state is doing that have implications as it relates to local funding requirements for us. The first one for the coming year's budget, our estimate is an additional $3.5 million of local funding will be required to pay for the employer portion of health insurance and retirement contribution rates that are set by the state. It's a good estimate because last year the state set the target rates for 2 years, this year and next year. And again, let me point out that this is just the local portion. The state picks up the retirement portion for the employer and the health insurance portion for the employer. For state-funded employees, this is just covering the increase for the locally funded employees. And Mark, can I ask you to give the board a sense of the rate of change on just the retirement over the last several years?
Yeah, so I've talked to you occasionally when I present the financials about inflation and growth, but I never take into account insurance and retirement. The retirement rate was around 8% at one time for matching retirement that we pay, and next year is projected to be over 18%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but 8 or 9 years ago, we had about $16 million budgeted for local retirement. Last year, I believe it was closer to $40 million for local retirement. And there is some growth of employees, yes, but it's also a big chunk of that's over 100% increase in the retirement rate that we're required to pay. So whenever I share with you inflation and growth, that's not something I include. That's a big number.
And that health insurance number, we didn't bring with us for today's purpose historical data, but years ago, I remember it in the $3,000 per employee range, employer contribution on an annual basis. Now it's pushing $6,000 a year. The next area, $4 million of additional local funding to provide a compensation increase of 2% to certified, non-certified, and school administrators. I'm looking at it, you're not. And we're assuming, that cost is assuming that the state will legislate a 2% increase for certified school administrators and a fixed 1% increase for non-certified staff, and that the state covers their portion. 1,000, I'm sorry.
Still 1%. I'm assuming we're going to get to principal pay and that.
We'll talk
impact
about it
later?
briefly today,
Okay.
yes, and I can give you an update on where we are with that. So we talked about this earlier today, that the state's going to be providing funding over a 4-year period for the enhancement teachers, about $6 million a year. That's going to require $750,000 a year for local supplement and dental that we provide locally. So you add that up at full phase, and at the end of 4 years, that's an additional $3 million of local funding will require. And to migrate the state formulas at the grade levels over the 4-year phase-in requires an additional $400,000 of funding in this coming year and a cumulative $6.4 million at the end of phase-in. And then those two numbers together are the roughly $9-10 million of local funding. To cover these, go into the state formula, adding these enhancement teachers, and that does not yet cover what we spoke about this afternoon when we talked about having to address class size issues by, let's say, doubling up a class and only adding a couple students and those issues.
So we're up to 35.9. Not including what we talked about with moving to the allotment.
Any other improvement.
All right.
And I would just add, for today's purpose, I wouldn't just take these numbers and add them up and make assumptions, because there's more to it than that.
Thank you, David.
I understand.
We're like cash registers over here. We just add it up.
So
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't be like that.
there are implications if the state does not continue to hold
You've taught me.
the principal salary schedule harmless based upon their shift from an old schedule to the new schedule that went into place this year. You'll likely see in a proposed budget funding to address that. Local funding, should the state not hold us harmless. In addition, we've assembled a team, including staff from HR and a group of principals, to develop a proposal for a proposed 2018-19 and beyond principal salary schedule that addresses some of the issues that are integrated within the new state schedule. We hope to be pulling that together over the coming few weeks. There may be an investment associated with that. We won't have that likely by April 10th when we intend to present the budget to you. We should have it, though, well before you have to, as a board, develop a proposed budget. So we'll bring that in the middle, and you can consider that. You can consider both the proposed schedule, if there's any associated investment with that, if the board's desirous of it. But going back to just the hold harmless piece, we feel that very strongly. I think it came up in yesterday's conversation. We've got about 20 or so principals that, if they chose to today, could retire. I can't speak for any of those 20, but I know if I was in those shoes, and I know that my retirement is based upon my 4 years of highest compensation, and embedded in that is going to be a step backwards that's going to help me make a decision. And I'll add that beyond those 20 or so that are able to retire today, there are another 15 that within just a few years, a handful of years, could follow suit. We spoke about earlier that we had a $2.4 million reserve for the current year to address class size issues, which the issues were much less stringent than next year's issues will be, or requirements will be. So we're going to do some homework on that, and you may hear something from us about that, I think likely, when we present the proposed budget to you in April. And Terry spoke to you earlier today about this, about the loss of funding conversion flexibility, and one of the key areas that popped up was that we have a lot of middle schools that do convert teaching months of employment to create that third assistant principal position. So that's something that you may see as well. And then last, Dr. Martin mentioned this earlier, the Wake County request, when we make a request to the county for local funding, it includes funding for charters as well. It's not all just for the Wake County public school system. To give you a sense of the total local county appropriation, including what we project growth to be in charters for next year, next year's county appropriation, around $36 million. That's an estimate at this point of the total county appropriation to Wake County Public Schools is not for Wake County Public Schools. $36 million of it goes to the charters. It just happens to flow through us. So we've done some heavy lifting to repurpose existing funds to address strategic plan priorities. That being said, there's still some local funding needs for new programming after growth, after program continuity, after legislative impact. And the two areas we'd like to point out today are new positions for social emotional learning and to continue the implementation of the extra duty schedule.
The extra duty schedule's, what, $3 to $4 million in this next phase?
We skipped last phase.
I think 1.8.
Phase last year.
1.7.
They said we'd catch it up.
But we've still got a 5-year.
1.4 million, and I believe that the original plan was to implement over 5 years. We determined that it was not going to take the full 5 years. Mark, do you recall off the top of your head? I think, what do we have, the equivalent of a year and a half left?
Right, I think
about a year and a half left.
Okay.
But those are two key areas that we feel. But again, those are competing with all those other needs. As far as next steps, our goal is to bring the superintendent's proposed budget to you at your April 10th meeting. You'll have a work session or work sessions to discuss it. You'll have a public hearing. And by law, the board is required to make a request to the county by May 15th of each year. And that's it as far as presentation. Be glad to take questions or open it up for your discussion.
One of the things that we put on last year was to bring employees that were not teachers, so the folks working in our lunchroom, our maintenance staff, our school support staff, to a living wage. I understand that if that cannot be a part of this, can we at least look at their salary structure? I was struck when we looked at our bus driver salary schedule that it took 15 years or 13 years to get to $15 an hour, and we were able to, in some years you didn't get a salary increase. So if we can't put that in this budget, can we at least look at ways of improving quality for those employees, because they're essential to make our schools run?
Yeah, Ms. Mahaffey, valid point. You didn't hear me during the last session, but a year earlier shared the number of employees we have making below a living wage. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was a significant
2,300.
Yeah.
Significant number. And we did have in this past year's budget, we did have a request to increase the salary of 1,000 employees. And that was a dollar amount for bus drivers to adjust them above and beyond other non-certified staff. And the legislature did also provide additional funding beyond what they provided for other non-certified staff. As far as bus drivers, it doesn't cover other categories like child nutrition workers, custodial, and other staff. It's my understanding that the legislature is looking at, again, a Part 2 for bus drivers. The House version a year ago was a 2-year plan. I think it was about $17 million in year 1 and an additional $17 million in year 2, but the final version was only a 1-year plan. So there may be some state funding for that. As it relates to additional funding for these other staff, again, I'm not going to say what is in the final budget. We're just trying to give you where are we. It's, do either one of you recall, it's in the $20 to $30 million range, if I'm not mistaken, to get our staff, all staff, up to a minimum of a $15 an hour rate.
I just struggle that we're one of the largest employers in the county, and this was an initiative that our county commissioners put in place for their employees, and yet we were unable to get that this past year.
Well, this is one of those things that I think needs to be somewhere in our budget case. I mean, they don't like the term deferred needs, but so let's figure out a different term. But yeah, I mean, the Wake County Commissioners are talking very loudly about how we've got a living wage, and there's that little, for Wake County employees, but there's that little asterisk that says unless you're a Wake County Public School employee. The other thing related to, it's not just a dollar value per hour. Not all of our employees can have a 40-hour work week. Right, our bus so you're paid $15 an hour, but if I can only work 6 hours a day instead of 8 hours a day, I mean, I guess 15 at 6 hours is better than 12 at 6 hours, but it's still an issue. So it's not just a dollar value, it's a number of hours a week. So I think that really needs to be highlighted.
And there may be other ways we can improve from a quality of life piece. I don't know if that includes doing a survey. I think Mr. Sutton had asked for something like that earlier in regards to our bus drivers, but what can we do to help? Dollars help, but there are other things that we can do as well, like salary schedule adjustments.
Before after school childcare.
Okay, you good? Any other questions?
So, doesn't even need to be an answer right now because probably isn't there. But again, for our long-term discussion, I guess my question is, are there any other things like the spec ed on the horizon that we need to be aware of? I mean, we're in a different climate in terms of how we need to think about things. We need to take some ownership of long-term planning. We too have tended to look at budgets year by year to too great of a degree, partly because we've had to, but maybe we need to, well, not maybe, we do need to look longer term. So I guess the question I have, and it doesn't have to be answered right now, is what else is on the horizon that might look like this? You know, $500,000 on the horizon doesn't bother me a whole lot. $8 million in a year, that does bother me.
You put it in the category, any expenditure that's funded from non-recurring funds.
And recurring and non-recurring.
Is a risk.
Absolutely.
Any expenditure. Right. So that's the category that you're referring to.
Absolutely.
Any expenditure from non-recurring funds. Yep. And that would include use of your unassigned fund balance from one year to help balance the budget in a subsequent year.
Right.
Dr. Martin, I guess I would add just at, again, the highest level. We'll start with the unassigned fund balance. Mark, what is it at now?
Our unassigned fund balance is at 9.9.
which is the lowest it's
Is it
been
what?
since,
9.9 million.
which represents how many days of operating?
It's about 2 days of operating, 0.65% of our operating budget, total operating.
It's the lowest since I've been here in 11 years. There's less cushion there, minimal cushion there. The class size issue that we've discussed today, we really don't know what the fiscal implications of meeting that standard, the legal standard, will be. And we'll do our best to guesstimate it, but until it's in history, I don't think we are capable of knowing. There is the issue that Ms. Mahaffey brought up, and well, I won't say this, I'll jinx myself, but we've been fortunate to not have more turnover than we have in this full employment economy, and some of these that are funded significantly below what some would consider to be a living wage. Some of that is likely rooted into employees being vested in the state retirement system, but when that goes away in 2021, the ability to attract new employees into those categories, I think, will be significantly impacted, because then it's the hourly rate. There's no other big benefit over here if I become a long-term employee. Those things, Terry, you want to mention the conversion piece?
Yeah, the reduction in flexibility from the state and the lack of ability to do conversions will impact us. And then, as you know, we budget a lot of our positions with no money underneath, depending on lapsed salaries. And as we have more and more schools that move into the restart model, those schools gain use of their own resources, and it comes out of that system pot that we can rely on. So those are some issues that are impacting us that we know about right now.
We heard earlier, and I know I've said it before, but we heard from our facilities team the impact of our traveling duet, of teacher translators, of what the impact is on the school. I really hope that as we develop this budget and we show the alignment to the strategic plan, I think it would help to have a sort of translator, not only for us, for the commissioners, but for the community to see here's where this goes into the classroom, because that was something that I heard a lot was this is difficult to understand. Do you know what this paragraph means? Can you explain that to me? I know that's a bit of an ask.
It's a huge ask
in March, but we have to be transparent and accountable to the public, and if they can't understand what we're putting in front of them, we can't really ask them to support it.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. I agree. It's a huge ask. However, our communication has, with all that's upon us, whether it's legislative mandates or reoccurring expenses in a non-recurring funding, I don't know how we can't ignore that we have to get the community behind us. And we can keep saying it's complicated, but we have to have some clear sound bites, and that's hard with a budget that's this complex. And I don't know the answer, and I do think we're asking you to work a miracle, given that by now we would already be upon ourselves of looking at a budget. So just to clarify, I think we just have to be clear with our timeline as well of where we are.
Other thoughts or questions? Well, that concludes the staff portion of this presentation.
Excellent.
Have we finished?
It's finished. Madam Chair, it's all yours.
It's all mine. We were extremely efficient. You all were extremely efficient, as was the staff and all the work that they put into this. So I think I will ask you, Dr. Burns, to just give us. You already walked us through kind of what we can anticipate at a timeline for K-3 class size. So in terms of budget,
Staff is continuing to work through the process. Mr. Nieder cautioned you not to run the tape.
Yes.
Come up with the total because there's another side to that. We're continuing to examine previous year's expenditures and any opportunities to conserve, repurpose, to look at elimination of certain things. And we'll do that. We will come up right on top of April 10th. I don't anticipate being done much earlier than that. Yes, you're right. Typically, you would have had more in your hands than you have today regarding the budget. We are at this place, and we're working as hard as we can. One of the things that's striking me as I'm getting into this layer by layer by layer with the staff is just how lean the school system is. You've made reductions in the past. There is the discussion around whether or not if you don't get the amount you request, is that a cut or not? Well, I think you've seen and heard that this isn't a linear function. It's a combination of a linear function, a step function, and the big surprises that get dropped in. And you've had a number of big surprises. The example of what's happened in special education is one that is very concerning. That, I think, is indicative of many areas that are just right at bone. And it strikes me more and more that this is looking like a crossroads period for the district financially, where a lot of things are coming to bear at the same time. It didn't happen last year or the year before. It's been pretty much since the Great Recession and then the recovery began. The economy's doing better. Things are different. However, if you look at the funding levels from the state, as an example, back 10 years ago, compare them to now, you're not seeing a whole lot of growth. And the needs are different. And Wake County prides itself in doing things in a fashion better than the state. And I think that's because we have a very demanding community. They have high expectations. They should. And all of that is playing into the process as we're working toward April 10th. So we will bring that to you on that date as a recommendation from the temporary superintendent. You will then, as you've done in the past, examine it. You'll revise it and modify it however you choose to address it before you approve it to go to the commissioners. There's a lot at stake. And just over the last day and a half, there are costs that are not small or insignificant. They're out of your control, out of my control, that are the result of some legislative changes. And we have to respond to them. The impact on Wake County is important to consider. And I acknowledge that Wake County is more complicated in many ways due to the growth and the expectations than a lot of other districts.
I think based on what you just said, we got to have a different process. If we go about it the same way we've been doing it, we're going to get the same result. And I don't know that changing a line item or, to your point, changing the deferred needs and calling it something else is not going to get a different result.
One thing that I would share is that there's not an easy, simple solution because it is very complicated. Again, some functions are linear, some are step, some are big surprises that some you might anticipate, but others, and you spent a lot of today examining one that was out there, and it's troublesome, but I agree with David Nieder. I don't know how we can yet grasp the total cost of implementing the K-3 class size reduction legislation in Wake County until it's been lived a year. I think staff has done a tremendous job of identifying this and that, and that's why this plan recommendation that comes to you is so critical to help drive the budget. and the bond, but I know that there's things that are missing there. You will only learn them when you live it. And you go, oh my gosh, now we got to account for that as well. And so those things together don't lend themselves to a simple solution.
Okay, so we are absolutely ahead of time, which is great. And you all, again, have been great, and I appreciate it. One thing I'd like to ask you all to do, besides letting you go early, is this is the first time we've done it this way without bringing in an outside facilitator. We spent 2 days together. You all have given me some informal feedback yesterday, but I would appreciate, I think Dr. Burns would too, any of your feedback. What worked, what didn't work, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful. And I mean this from presentation style to process and anything in between.
And please note, it will not hurt our feelings.
It will not hurt our feelings.
The goal would only be to make it better.
Absolutely.
Well, my initial thought when you talked again about not having a facilitator, I don't think that was one that was needed. This wasn't a retreat. This was a work session. So as a work session, this was what it was. It did what it was designed to do. Staff and board working together to help address some of these. If we were mission setting, goal setting, vision setting, and you're breaking off in small groups and doing this and that, then facilitator would be helpful. But for the purpose of what I felt like we were trying to get done, this was the right sort of deal or format. So you all don't need to apologize for not having it. Apologize for not having a facilitator, because it was a work. Again, it was a work session. It was not a retreat.
It was information getting. It was great.
I particularly liked the affinity protocol we used, because all of us like to talk, and we all got to talk. We just had to put the words on the sticky notes, okay? And so I think you got to actually better list in the end when there's a lot of work involved in just putting all of that together and understanding it. But I felt like throughout the day, I'm just not sure how we did it, but everybody had the opportunity to have a voice at the table. I just really appreciated that. I thought it was the structure of it, and I said this yesterday. Thank you for putting breaks in.
Organic and planned.
Organic and planned, yes.
Thank you.
I've always taken the organic, but, I like...
They fed us well.
Well,
Melissa did a good job keeping everything. I don't mean Melissa, just keep us, whoever does that. I mean, you and your troops.
I think getting to see the impact of things. We saw the facilities impact, we saw the budget impact, we saw staffing, and then we came back and talked about them. We have to deal with the reality, and we can't just be seeing, here's what it's going to be. It stinks. I mean, to lose a collaboration space, we were talking about losing a music space, or what is the impact of, having the double up. Yes, there might be a positive impact to pedagogy, but it's going to cost this much out of the budget. And so just being able to take the time to unfurl that a little bit in this format was helpful.
I enjoyed the process. My personality, I have to work hard in a meeting, even if I'm quiet, to pay attention and understand what other people are saying. And an 8-hour meeting is challenging with my type. But I'm blessed because I'm really an auditory in terms of how I learn. So the conversation was very helpful. One question as we move forward will the facility, how will this process inform the development of the capital plan and the timing with the operational budget? Because we've got a timeline, and Joe, I'm not sure how the next deliverable to the county or to this joint team is, what the timing is for that. And I think we really haven't understood. We've got new numbers based on what the capacity of schools will be next year, but we really haven't been able to look at the schools in our district yet to see what that is and to raise questions or to ask for clarification. So,
and in terms of order of operation, we needed to get the K-3 information out. We'll need your approval of whatever the plan is. And then the budget, and then the bond, and they're all jammed up together.
Okay.
So in terms of the very long response, very long plans, it will be review and adjustment of CIP as necessary. That'll be in the recommendation that comes to you, I assure you, for K-3. Joe's and his team have got some work to do now, but we needed to get this to you first so that we had an idea of what your thinking was. Obviously, one solution, not one that you would accept, I'm sure would be, let's just buy a bunch of mobile units, or let's just build buildings. Well, that's not going to help us in the immediate, nor perhaps in the long term, if that's the only answer. There's some interim steps. So it felt like we needed to get the K-3 discussion first, and that's a great question. So that's the order of operation that we've been looking at: K-3, budget, bond, and I realize the bond. Yes, on us too. I think May 15th. By May 15th, you have to approve a resolution requesting the
general obligation.
Right, and then after that, you really got to roll hard and fast. So yes, sir, we're aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
I just comment to process. I mean, Mr. Sutton was absolutely right. This was what we needed for what we needed to do. And I just want to really commend staff for your joining and participation. Sometimes board discussions are the board just talking, and you know, we have a perspective, but we often talk about the boots on the ground. The boots on the ground is partly in our schools, but it's partly in central office. And so I just want to commend staff for jumping in. You know, Ms. Kimsey Barker helping us talk about the dual loading of a class, for example. I just find that really helpful. And we have our distinct lanes, but we're a team. And so I just really commend staff for your engagement with us in this process.
Thank you, Dr. Burns, for all the back and forth you did with me to prepare for this.
I'm just an innocent bystander.
We'll just pretend you didn't say that.
Was way out of that line.
It's tempered.
Not innocent? That's my statement.
No, I tried to do
You did a horrible try.
But also, timing is everything, and to step up and support the staff in a way that they could get done what they needed to. And then also remembering to remind, not just you, but reminding me that you have been a constant cheerleader for the staff. And so I also want the staff to know that you continue to remind me how hard and fast you all were working. And so, that means a lot for me, especially, using your term as a temporary superintendent to make sure that you are relaying to our board the diligence and commitment of our staff. That means a lot, and I think staff should hear me say that about the way that you communicate with me.
And it is true. And it does take a partnership. And what you have given me and staff through your discussion is an understanding of your thinking. And in terms of good governance, when your staff can understand your thinking, again, to put it simply, our job is to present you with what's technically feasible. Your job is to determine what is politically acceptable.
There's that pest thing again.
Yeah, that pest thing. So again, you've helped us understand in your minds not only what is technically feasible, but also what might be politically acceptable to you. And it helps us bring you, I think, a better recommendation. So thank you.
So I'm glad we're all on the same page, and to break up the kumbaya, we've we have got a lot of work ahead of us.
I know, I'm just...
So you didn't have a break. There probably isn't a break, staff. I mean, there is. I mean, it's a sprint because we have lots of deadlines ahead of us. So I'm still your cheerleader, but I'm also a realist too. So I appreciate it. It's a pest to be both. But Mr. Sutton,
maybe a couple of things that could be a change or improvement or what have you. We've been quite busy the last few weeks or months, what have you, but there might be more work sessions that are like this, but not as long.
But they should be.
That, even if we take a half day once a quarter, that gives us this opportunity to have this kind of dialogue so that staff has more insight to our thinking and we have more insight into yours. It's hard to do that in an hour work session, an hour and a half, and we rush through to try to get to the boardroom or the board meeting. And if we wait this long, then we're a day and a half, and it's kind of too much. So maybe breaking it up and taking one topic or two topics and taking a half day or so and spending some time to hash some of this stuff out and doing that a little bit more often might be helpful. The other thing I was going to suggest, and I asked for it at the beginning yesterday, and you went back through and kind of pointed out what were the objectives or what we wanted to accomplish through each session. It might be helpful, and I think we do this sometimes on our committee agendas, that there's the objective and the point of the meeting is to provide greater understanding for this or to prioritize that or whatever the specific objectives are for that session or that area is helpful, at least for me, as a visual, to kind of see what is it that we want to accomplish in this session or this part or this part. That helps, I think, the focus and then cuts down on some of the conversation too, because we know what we want to get done and we need to get done.
You're saying he did that, right?
We did, but I had to kind of flip back several times and kind of go back and like, well, what was the objective for this part, or what do you all want us to understand for that part? So having that kind of clearly stated throughout, for me, in that visual is helpful, so that when I can refer back and see, well, what is it that we want to accomplish during this time here, that time here. So.
BWAT board will be able to.
Yeah.
What happens to the parking lot?
We take that in different areas. We're going to try to figure out how to incorporate that into either committee meetings or committee as a whole, or however it fits after we get through with the big three, K3 budget and bond. And so it's coming, but it's not going to disappear. So these are somewhat area specific.
Right.
And we'll go that way.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, John.
Great job. What does Central play?
The 8th.
Are they at night? They're not an afternoon game?